The Bradfords' Christmas party was a spectacle of joy and tradition. Every year, the grand colonial house glowed with soft golden lights, the smell of cinnamon and pine filling the air. Friends, family, and neighbors gathered in cheerful clusters, their laughter and chatter blending into a symphony of holiday mirth. Jack Bradford, at 36, had grown used to these gatherings. He stood near the mantel, watching the festivities with a quiet sense of satisfaction. His wife, Sarah, floated through the crowd, effortlessly charming everyone she spoke to. Her emerald dress shimmered under the soft light, and her auburn curls framed a face lit with warmth. Jack admired her ability to light up a room, even on her fourth glass of wine. Their son, Jacob, was nearby, building a tower out of brightly wrapped presents under the tree. At 5 years old, he was the center of Jack's world, the child they'd waited so long for. Every laugh, every wide-eyed smile was a reminder of what mattered most. But as Jack's gaze wandered across the room, it landed on his younger brother, Ethan. Ethan, the golden child of the family, successful, confident, and charismatic in a way Jack could never quite match. Ethan stood at the heart of a lively group, his laugh louder than the rest, his presence commanding attention. His wife, Claire, clung to his arm, her perfect poise a testament to their picture-perfect life. "Jack, there you are." Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts as she approached, her cheeks flushed from the wine and the warmth of the room. "Your mom wants us to take a family picture by the tree. Come on." Jack smiled and followed her, wrapping an arm around her waist as they moved toward the rest of the family. His parents, Richard and Eleanor, were already gathered with Ethan and Claire, arranging themselves for the perfect photo. Jacob ran over to join them, his laughter ringing out as he tugged at Jack's hand. The photographer clicked away, capturing the moments that would decorate the Bradford family albums. But as the camera's flash illuminated their smiling faces, Jack couldn't help but notice the small things, the way his parents beamed at Ethan, the subtle tilt of their bodies toward him in the frame. It was always like this. Ethan, the favorite. Ethan, the golden boy. The photo session ended, and the group dispersed, returning to their conversations and drinks. Jack found himself back by the mantel, this time with Sarah by his side. She leaned against him, her glass of red wine swirling lazily in her hand. "Jack," she said, her voice soft and warm. "Isn't this perfect? Just all of us here together." "It is," Jack agreed, though his eyes lingered on Ethan across the room. "Do you think they'll ever stop comparing you to him?" Sarah asked, a slight slur creeping into her words. Jack chuckled, trying to brush off the comment. "It doesn't bother me. Not tonight, anyway." But Sarah's gaze turned distant, her smile fading as she took another sip of wine. "You know, I think they do love him more," she murmured. Jack stiffened. "What are you talking about?" Sarah turned to him, her eyes glassy. "Your parents. They've always loved Ethan more. Everyone knows it." She laughed, a hollow sound that seemed to cut through the festive air. "It's like they think he's perfect or something." "Sarah," Jack said, his tone firm. "You've had a little too much to drink. Let's get you some water." But she waved him off, raising her glass instead. "No, no, I'm fine. I'm just saying. If they love Ethan so much, maybe that's why it wasn't such a big deal." Jack frowned, confusion etching lines into his face. "What wasn't a big deal?" Sarah blinked at him, her cheeks flushed as she seemed to realize she'd said too much. But the wine had loosened her tongue, and her thoughts tumbled out before she could stop them. "Well. I mean. It was just one time," she said, her voice louder now, carrying over the noise of the party. "And it was for us, Jack. For us to have Jacob." The room quieted around them, the weight of her words sinking into the air like a stone. Jack stared at her, his mind scrambling to make sense of what she was saying. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice low, urgent. Sarah laughed nervously, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. But there was none. All eyes were on her now, on them. "I mean, it worked, didn't it?" she said, her words slurring slightly. "Ethan. He helped us. He gave us Jacob when we couldn't have a baby ourselves." The room erupted into a stunned silence. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the crowd as Jack's chest tightened, his breath catching in his throat. "You're saying," he could barely force the words out. "You're saying Jacob is Ethan's son?" Sarah's face crumpled, tears brimming in her eyes. "I didn't know what else to do," she whispered. "We tried everything, Jack. And Ethan. He said he could help. I just wanted us to have a family." Jack stumbled back, his mind reeling. The faces around them blurred, his parents' stunned expressions, Ethan's wide-eyed shock, Claire's hand flying to her mouth. "How could you do this?" Jack's voice trembled with anger and betrayal. "I did it for us," Sarah cried, reaching for him. "I love you, Jack. I didn't know what else to do." Jack turned, his fists clenching at his sides as he locked eyes with Ethan. His brother's face was pale, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. "Did you know about this?" Jack demanded, his voice shaking with fury. Ethan opened his mouth, but no words came out. The once cheerful atmosphere of the party had turned into something cold and suffocating. Jack felt the walls closing in around him, the weight of the betrayal crushing him. He turned and walked toward the door, ignoring the voices calling after him. Outside, the cold air hit him like a slap, but it wasn't enough to numb the pain. As he stood on the snowy lawn, the laughter and joy of the holiday season now felt like a cruel mockery. Everything he thought he knew, about his wife, his brother, his son, had been turned upside down. Inside, the party was unraveling, the Bradfords' carefully curated image of perfection cracking before everyone's eyes. But Jack couldn't face them. Not now. Jack stood outside, the biting cold air nipping at his face. The snow-covered lawn stretched out before him, but his mind couldn't focus on anything tangible. His hands trembled, not from the chill but from the storm raging inside him. The echoes of Sarah's words still rang in his ears, dissonant and sharp, like shattered glass cutting into his thoughts. Jacob is Ethan's son. The boy Jack had raised, the child who called him Daddy with pure, innocent joy, wasn't his. The reality hit him in waves, each one heavier than the last. The betrayal wasn't just Sarah's, it was Ethan's. His own brother. And his parents? They had encouraged it. A tangled web of deceit, all spun under the guise of helping. He heard the front door creak open behind him. A moment later, the crunch of footsteps approached. Jack didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew who it was. Jack. Ethan's voice was tentative, unsteady, so unlike the confident man who always seemed to have the world in the palm of his hand. Jack stayed silent, his breath visible in the cold air. "Jack, I didn't. I mean, I never wanted." "Don't," Jack snapped, his voice low and dangerous. He turned slowly, his eyes locking onto Ethan's. "Don't you dare stand there and act like this wasn't a choice you made. You did this. You both did this." Ethan's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. For once, the golden boy had nothing to say. "You knew how much we struggled," Jack continued, his voice shaking with anger. "You knew what it meant to us to have a child. And instead of supporting us, you offered yourself like some kind of savior." "It wasn't like that," Ethan finally managed, his tone pleading. "Sarah was devastated, Jack. She thought she was failing you. I thought I was helping." "Helping?" Jack's laugh was bitter, cutting through the icy air. "You call this helping? You didn't just betray me, Ethan. You took something from me. You took my family, my trust, my son." Ethan flinched at the word son, his guilt written plainly on his face. But before he could respond, the door opened again. This time, it was Eleanor Bradford, their mother, stepping out into the cold. "Jack," she said softly, her voice heavy with concern. "Please, come back inside. Let's talk about this." Jack's gaze snapped to her, his fury blazing anew. "You knew," he said, his voice cold. "You knew, and you didn't say anything. You went along with it. How could you?" Eleanor's face fell, the weight of the situation pressing down on her shoulders. "We were trying to do what was best for you, Jack. For both of you. You were in so much pain, and we didn't know how else to help. Don't you dare justify this, Jack spat, his fists clenching at his sides. You didn't help me. You didn't care about me. You cared about the idea of a perfect family. You cared about Ethan being the hero. And now I'm the fool. Jack, that's not true, Eleanor said, reaching out to him. But he stepped back, the distance between them growing in more ways than one. I can't do this, Jack said, his voice breaking. Not here. Not now. He turned and walked away, his boots crunching against the snow as he made his way to his car. Behind him, he heard Sarah calling out, her voice thick with tears. But he didn't look back. He couldn't. Jack drove aimlessly, the streets of their small town blurring together as his thoughts spiraled. He replayed the moments in his mind, Sarah's confession, Ethan's excuses, his mother's feeble justifications. He couldn't go home, not yet. The house that had once been his sanctuary now felt like a cage, its walls tainted with lies. Eventually, he found himself parked outside a small bar on the edge of town. The neon sign flickered, casting an eerie glow on the fresh snow. He hesitated for a moment before stepping inside. The bar was quiet, the kind of place where locals gathered to escape their own troubles. Jack slid onto a stool at the far end of the counter, nodding at the bartender. Whiskey, he said. Neat. The bartender poured the amber liquid, sliding the glass across the counter. Jack took a long sip, the burn in his throat a welcome distraction from the ache in his chest. Rough night, a voice asked from a few seats down. Jack glanced over to see an older man nursing a beer. His face was weathered, his eyes sharp and knowing. You could say that, Jack replied, his voice flat. The man chuckled, raising his glass. Well, here's to surviving another day. Jack gave a half-hearted smile, clinking his glass against the man's. But as he sat there, staring into the depths of his drink, he couldn't shake the questions gnawing at his mind. How could Sarah do this? How could Ethan? And Jacob, what did this mean for Jacob? He finished his drink and motioned for another, the weight of his thoughts pressing down on him like a heavy blanket. He knew he couldn't avoid the confrontation forever. The truth was out now, and there was no putting it back. But as he sat in the dimly lit bar, he realized he wasn't just angry, he was hurt. Hurt by the people he trusted most, the people who were supposed to have his back. And as the night wore on, one thing became clear, Jack couldn't face this alone. Jack woke the next morning in his car, parked at the edge of the lake that bordered their town. The rising sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink, casting its light over the frozen surface of the water. He hadn't meant to sleep there, but the hours at the bar had dulled the edge of his anger, leaving only exhaustion in its place. For a moment, he allowed himself to sit in the stillness, letting the cold air seep into his thoughts. But the events of the night before surged back with brutal clarity, shaking him awake. Sarah's confession, Ethan's betrayal, and his mother's complicity, it was all still there, gnawing at the edges of his mind. Jack knew what he needed to do. He couldn't change the past, but he could control what came next. By mid-morning, Jack had met with his lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Rebecca Klein. Rebecca had a reputation for being ruthless in court, and Jack needed someone who wouldn't flinch in the face of the tangled mess his life had become. So let me get this straight, Rebecca said, her pen poised over her notepad. Your wife confessed, publicly, no less, that your brother is the biological father of your son, and this was orchestrated with your parents' knowledge. Jack nodded, his jaw tightening. That's right. Rebecca let out a low whistle. That's quite the family dynamic. She glanced up at him, her gaze steady. And you're sure about this? You want a divorce? Jack hesitated, the weight of the decision settling over him. For years, Sarah had been his partner, his confidant, the woman he thought he'd build a life with. But the depth of her betrayal left no room for doubt. Yes, he said firmly. I can't move forward with her after this. And Jacob, he swallowed hard, the thought of losing the boy cutting deep. I want to protect him, Rebecca. He's innocent in all this. Rebecca nodded. We'll fight for custody. But given the revelation about his paternity, it's going to get complicated. Are you prepared for that? Jack straightened in his chair, determination hardening his features. I'll do whatever it takes. The first step in Jack's plan was confronting Ethan. It wasn't just about holding his brother accountable, it was about making him face the consequences of his actions. Jack found Ethan at his office, a sleek, glass-walled space in the heart of the city. Ethan's assistant looked uneasy as she led Jack to the private conference room where Ethan was waiting. "Jack," Ethan said, standing as his brother entered. "I've been trying to reach you. We need to talk." "We're talking now," Jack said coldly, closing the door behind him. Ethan gestured for Jack to sit, but Jack remained standing, his arms crossed over his chest. "This isn't a negotiation, Ethan. This is me telling you how things are going to be." Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I know I messed up. I know I hurt you. But we can work through this. We're family." Jack's laugh was bitter. "Family? Don't you dare talk to me about family. You destroyed that the moment you decided to play hero with my wife." Ethan flinched but didn't argue. "Here's how this is going to work," Jack continued, his voice steady and unwavering. "I'm divorcing Sarah. And since you're Jacob's biological father, you're going to pay child support." Ethan's eyes widened in shock. "Child support? Jack, you're his dad." "No," Jack said sharply, cutting him off. "I was his dad because I thought he was mine. But you took that from me, Ethan. You took everything. So now, you get to step up. You want to play savior? Fine. Be the father you decided to be 5 years ago." Ethan's face paled. "Jack, please. I didn't mean for any of this to happen." "But it did," Jack said, his voice ice cold. "And now you're going to deal with the consequences. Rebecca will be in touch with your lawyers. I suggest you get ready." Without waiting for a response, Jack turned and walked out of the room, leaving Ethan to grapple with the weight of his actions. The divorce proceedings were swift and brutal. Sarah had tried to apologize, to explain, but Jack shut her out completely. Every conversation they had went through their lawyers. In court, the evidence was irrefutable. Sarah's public confession, combined with the results of a paternity test, left no doubt about Jacob's biological parentage. The judge ruled in Jack's favor, granting him full custody of Jacob. Ethan was ordered to pay child support, a decision that left him visibly shaken in the courtroom. For Jack, the victory was bittersweet. He had fought to protect Jacob, to shield him from the fallout of the choices made by the adults around him. But the boy's innocence only made the betrayal cut deeper. On the day the divorce was finalized, Jack stood in his now empty house, the silence pressing down on him like a weight. The photographs of their once happy family were gone, replaced by blank walls and empty shelves. Jacob ran into the room, clutching a toy truck in his small hands. "Daddy, look," he said, his face alight with excitement. Jack knelt down, pulling Jacob into a tight hug. For a moment, he let himself forget about the pain, the betrayal, the anger. Jacob was his son, no matter what the DNA test said. "I see it, buddy," Jack said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's amazing." As he held his son close, Jack made a silent promise to himself and to Jacob. They would move forward together. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but Jack was determined to rebuild their life, brick by brick, step by step. The courtroom was silent as the judge's gavel came down, its sharp crack marking the end of Jack and Sarah's marriage. Jack didn't look at her as he rose to leave. He couldn't. Seeing her now, head bowed and hands wringing nervously in her lap, only reminded him of the life they'd built, and the lie it had been built on. Outside, the air was heavy with the threat of snow, and Jack welcomed the sting of the cold on his face. It felt real, unlike the surreal whirlwind of the past weeks. He paused on the courthouse steps, his breath visible in the icy air. "Jack," a voice called behind him. He turned to see Ethan standing a few steps below him, looking just as unmoored. Ethan's tailored coat hung loose on his frame, and his usual confident posture was absent. "Not here," Jack said sharply. "Please, just hear me out," Ethan pleaded. "I never meant to hurt you. I never wanted this to happen." Jack's jaw tightened. "You keep saying that, Ethan. But it did happen. And it didn't just happen. It was a choice. Your choice. You want me to forgive you? Tell me, what part of this do you think is forgivable? Ethan flinched, his face pale. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I know I don't deserve it. But I'm still Jacob's father. I want to be part of his life. Jack's stomach turned. You want to be part of his life? Now. After 5 years of letting me raise him, love him, think he was mine. You don't get to swoop in and play dad, Ethan. You don't get to take that from me, too. He's my son, Ethan said quietly, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Jack took a step forward, his eyes narrowing. No, Ethan. He's my son. He may share your blood, but that's it. Jacob doesn't know you, and he doesn't need to. If you think I'm going to let you waltz in and disrupt his life just because you suddenly feel guilty, you're delusional. For a moment, neither brother spoke. The silence stretched between them, heavy and charged. Then Ethan sighed, running a hand through his hair. You're right, he said. I have no right to ask. But I'm going to prove to you, and to Jacob, that I'm not the person you think I am. Jack laughed bitterly. Good luck with that. Back at home, Jack found Jacob in the living room, surrounded by a sea of crayons and paper. The boy was drawing furiously, his tongue poking out in concentration. Hey, buddy, Jack said, his voice softening as he approached. Jacob looked up, his face lighting up. Daddy! Look what I made. Jack knelt beside him, taking in the colorful mess of lines and shapes. That's amazing, Jacob. What is it? It's our house, Jacob said proudly, pointing to a rectangle with windows and a chimney. And this is you, and me, and Mommy. Jack's chest tightened. He forced a smile. That's beautiful, buddy. You're such a great artist. As Jacob went back to his drawing, Jack sat back on his heels, watching him. The boy had no idea what had happened, no understanding of the storm that had upended their lives. Jack wanted to keep it that way for as long as possible. But he couldn't avoid the questions forever. That night, after Jacob was tucked into bed, Jack sat in the dimly lit kitchen, nursing a glass of whiskey. The silence of the house was oppressive, pressing in on him from all sides. He thought of Sarah, of Ethan, of the life they'd all destroyed. His phone buzzed on the table, breaking the quiet. He glanced at the screen, a text from Sarah. Please. Let's talk. I know I've hurt you, but we can work this out, for Jacob's sake. Jack stared at the message, his thumb hovering over the screen. Finally, he typed a response. There's nothing to talk about. Jacob is all that matters now. He hit send and set the phone down, feeling a strange mix of relief and finality. The days that followed were a blur of adjustments. Jack threw himself into being the best father he could be, channeling his anger and pain into making sure Jacob felt safe and loved. But the cracks in his family were impossible to ignore. His parents reached out repeatedly, their messages filled with apologies and pleas for reconciliation. Jack ignored them all. He couldn't bring himself to face them, not yet. Ethan, too, continued to try, leaving voicemails that Jack deleted without listening to. But the hardest part was Jacob's questions. Why isn't Mommy here? He asked one night as Jack tucked him in. Jack hesitated, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. Mommy and Daddy are going to live in different houses now, he said carefully. But we both love you very much, Jacob. That will never change. Jacob's brow furrowed. Did I do something wrong? No, buddy, Jack said quickly, pulling him into a tight hug. You didn't do anything wrong. This is grown-up stuff, and it has nothing to do with you. Jacob nodded, but the uncertainty in his eyes lingered, and it broke Jack's heart. Weeks turned into months, and slowly, Jack began to rebuild his life. He found strength in the small moments, Jacob's laughter, a quiet evening with a book, the kindness of friends who stood by him. But the wounds remained, raw and unhealed. And as much as Jack wanted to close the door on the past, he knew the final confrontation was inevitable. Ethan wouldn't let go. Neither would Sarah. And the question of what kind of role they would play in Jacob's life loomed like a shadow over everything Jack tried to rebuild. The snow was falling heavily the night Jack faced the final confrontation. It was as if the sky itself bore the weight of his grief, blanketing the world in white silence. He sat at the dining table, a stack of legal papers spread before him. The words blurred as he stared at them: custody arrangement, parental visitation, child support agreement. Jacob was asleep upstairs, his soft breathing the only sound in the house. Jack's phone buzzed on the table, and he glanced at it, half hoping, half dreading what it would say. "Ethan, we need to talk. Please, for Jacob's sake." Jack set the phone down with a heavy sigh. He had tried to avoid this moment, but it had been building for months. The court ruling had granted Jack full custody, but Ethan had pushed for visitation rights. Sarah had supported him, claiming that Jacob deserved to know his real father. The words had cut Jack deeply. He had been Jacob's father in every way that mattered, and yet the legal battle had reduced their bond to something fragile and tenuous. The knock at the door came shortly after midnight. Jack opened it to find Ethan standing there, his coat dusted with snow, his expression somber. "Jack," Ethan said quietly. "Thank you for seeing me." Jack didn't respond, stepping aside to let his brother in. Ethan glanced around the house, his gaze lingering on the scattered toys in the living room, the faint glow of the night light upstairs. "I didn't come here to fight," Ethan began. "I came here because I can't stand what's happening to us. This hatred between us. It's killing me, Jack." Jack folded his arms, his jaw tight. "What did you expect, Ethan? That we'd all just move on? Pretend like nothing happened?" "No," Ethan said quickly. "I know what I did. I know I betrayed you in the worst way possible. But Jacob, he's innocent in all this. He deserves to know the truth. He deserves to know me." Jack's voice was low, trembling with restrained anger. "The truth? You want to tell Jacob that his father is the man who destroyed his family? That the life he's known was built on a lie?" Ethan flinched, but he held Jack's gaze. "I want him to know that he's loved. By me, by you, by Sarah. We owe him that much." Jack's fists clenched at his sides. "You don't get to speak for me. I've given everything to that boy. I've been there for him every single day. And now you want to swoop in and claim him as your own. You don't deserve him, Ethan." "I'm not trying to take him away from you," Ethan said, his voice breaking. I want to be part of his life. I want to make things right." Jack stared at him, his chest heaving with emotion. The room was silent except for the sound of the clock ticking on the wall. "There's no making this right," Jack said finally, his voice cold and flat. "You can't undo what you've done. You can't fix this. You've destroyed everything, Ethan. Our family. Our trust. Jacob's future. And for what?" Ethan's eyes filled with tears, but he didn't speak. "Get out," Jack said quietly, turning away. "Before I say something I can't take back. Jack, please. Get out." Jack roared, his voice echoing through the empty house. Ethan hesitated for a moment, then nodded, his shoulders slumping. He turned and walked to the door, pausing only briefly before stepping out into the snow. Days turned into weeks, and Jack kept his distance from everyone, his parents, Ethan, Sarah. He focused all his energy on Jacob, trying to shield him from the storm that had overtaken their lives. But the cracks in their family were too deep to mend. One evening, as Jack was reading Jacob a bedtime story, the boy looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes. "Daddy," he said softly. "Do I have another daddy?" The question hit Jack like a physical blow. He set the book down, his hands trembling. "Why do you ask that, buddy?" Jacob shrugged, his small hands fidgeting with the blanket. "Mommy said Uncle Ethan is special. Like a daddy. Is that true?" Jack closed his eyes, the weight of the moment crushing him. He had known this day would come, but he wasn't ready for it. "Jacob," he began, his voice thick with emotion. "You have one daddy. Me. I love you more than anything in the world. That's all you need to know." The boy seemed satisfied with the answer, snuggling closer to Jack as he drifted off to sleep. But Jack lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, his heart heavy with the knowledge that the truth would one day break through. Months later, the inevitable happened. A chance encounter between Jacob and Ethan at a family gathering left the boy full of questions Jack couldn't answer. And as much as Jack tried to protect Jacob, the truth came out, messy, painful, and devastating. Jacob's innocent view of the world shattered, and with it, Jack's carefully constructed life. The boy began to withdraw, confused and hurt by the revelations about his parentage. Jack could see the change in him, the light dimming in his eyes. One evening, as Jacob lay in bed, he turned to Jack and said, "I love you, Daddy. But I think I love Uncle Ethan too. Is that okay?" Jack's heart broke in that moment. He pulled Jacob close, his tears falling silently onto the boy's hair. "Of course, buddy," he whispered. "It's okay to love him. It's okay to love both of us." But deep down, Jack knew that things would never be the same. The betrayal, the lies, the fractured relationships, they had left scars that time couldn't heal. In the end, Jack had fought to protect Jacob, but the cost had been too great. His family was shattered, and though he and Jacob had each other, the shadow of the past loomed over them. The snow fell softly outside as Jack sat alone in the quiet house, the laughter of Christmases past a distant memory. What would you do if betrayal came from those closest to you? Share your thoughts on Jack's story and how you'd handle his heartbreaking choices.